The Victorian era is more relevant now than ever as we watch the Zoomer generation turn away from the materialism and worldliness of the plastic age. The Victorians, too, turned from the materialism and debauchery of the Georgian era, which you can learn about in the Lord Byron and Lady Caroline Lamb videos on this channel. Be sure to check us out on Rumble too, especially as YouTube clamps down with censorship, as well as the Hoopoo app on the App Store. The Georgian era preceded the Edwardian era, largely considered to be one of the golden ages of humanity before the globalist world wars. The Edwardian era was named for British King Edward VII, who died in 1910. Raised in the Victorian era under his mother, Queen Victoria, King Edward VII, or Bertie as he was known, rebelled hard against the rules and regulations of his childhood. His extramarital sexual proclivities have been largely explored, but he also opened the British Empire's highest echelons to Jews for the first time in Europe. One such Jew, Nathan or Natty Rothschild, first Baron Rothschild, always seems to appear when Bertie was in crisis, whether at his father's deathbed or during an estrangement from his wife, Queen Alexandra. Natty seemed to appear. Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband and Bertie's father, warned Bertie about the dangers of debauched individuals. And after his friendship with Natty blossomed, Prince Albert fell into a deep despair and died. Let's explore the relationship between King Edward VII and the Rothschilds. Nathaniel Mayer, or Natty Rothschild, first Baron Rothschild, was born in 1840 and died in 1915. He was a British banker and politician from the wealthy international Rothschild family, hailing from its Austrian arm. He was also a hereditary baron of the Austrian Empire. 1 year older than Bertie, Natty met the royal son at Trinity College, Cambridge in 1861 when Natty was 21 and Bertie was 20 years old. Don Liddell, the father of the real-life inspiration for Alice in Wonderland, Alice Liddell, was charged with keeping an eye on Bertie. But Don Liddell had his hands full with the strange activities of the Reverend Charles Dodgson, who loved his daughters a bit too much. As a result, Bertie, the boy who craved society, moved into other circles, including that of Natty's, who never managed to attain his Cambridge degree. Prior to his time at Cambridge, Prince Albert warned his oldest son that he was constantly being watched and surveyed, especially during his trip to Canada. Prince Albert came from a broken home, with parents who cheated on each other throughout their marriage, and he was especially sensitive to degenerate behavior. Bertie pushed back against his father, stating he knew he was constantly being watched. But for Prince Albert, the rot was something to be very aware of. Lytton Strachey, the Bloomsbury degenerate, who you can learn about on this channel, widely circulated a rumor that Prince Albert's real parentage was Jewish, due to his mother's constant extramarital affairs years after Prince Albert's death. Prince Albert was very aware of how such rumors could destabilize even the most hard-working monarch. Per the 2013 book by Jane Ridley, Bertie, Natty was a bad influence on Bertie almost from the start, and looked very poorly upon the Prince of Wales' German heritage. Here is an excerpt from her book. At Cambridge, Bertie sucked strong cigars and hunted with the drag hounds. His minder, General Bruce, forbade him from asking anyone back to Mattingly, but he was uneasily aware that Bertie's love of excitement and constitutional disinclination to all serious pursuits tended to carry him almost unconsciously into the company of the idle and frivolous. For the first time in his life, Bertie made real friends: Charles Carrington, the boy he played with at Buckingham Palace, and Nathaniel Rothschild and his brother Alfred. For the Rothschilds, this was a social breakthrough, bringing access to the court. For Bertie, it was the beginning of a lifelong friendship that was to define his style of royalty. This drag hunt was paid for largely by the Rothschilds, and Natty noted Bertie was not allowed expensive horses owing to his parents' disapproval of hunting. No wonder that he gets so many falls, commented Natty. I fancy the little spirit he has is quite broken, as his remarks are commonplace and very slow. He will, I suppose, eventually settle down into a well-disciplined German prince with all the narrow views of his father's family. Nellie, the actress, Clifton, briefly became Bertie's mistress. Through her and her friends among the Guards officers, Bertie made his first forays into a secret London nightlife of theaters, casinos, and women in deep décolletage. The 1860s was a decade of sexual liberation, a brief interlude of eroticism which has been obscured to posterity by Victorian prudishness and respectability. The world in which Nellie Clifton was the girlfriend of a number of young officers was not squalid or furtive. To some, it was fashionable and fast. This was the era in which Bertie reached manhood, and it shaped his sexuality for life. There are hints about his initiation with Nellie, although only hints because he was clever at hiding his tracks in letters to his friend Charles Carrington. In November of that year, Lord Torrington, a courtier and gossip, came into waiting at Windsor and repeated to Prince Albert the rumors about Nellie's seduction of Bertie. Queen Victoria never forgot Albert's misery. Oh, that face, that heavenly face of woe and sorrow which was so dreadful to witness. Albert penned a long, self-pitying letter to his son, writing with a heavy heart on a subject which has caused me the deepest pain I have yet felt in this life. How could Bertie allow himself to have sexual intercourse with this woman? He couldn't bring himself to write prostitute. To thrust yourself into the hands of one of the most abject of the human species, to be by her initiated in the sacred mysteries of creation which ought to remain shrouded in holy awe until touched by pure and undefiled hands. At your age, the sexual passions began to move in young men and lead them to seek explanation to relieve a state of vague suspense and desire. Why did you not open yourself to your father? I would have reminded you the special mode in which these desires are to be gratified by the holy ties of matrimony. This was something that weighed on Prince Albert's mind for months, and so when he eventually spoke to Bertie about it face to face, it would be their last conversation. In November 1861, Bertie received a surprise visit at Cambridge from his father, who had resolved to have it out with him. Bertie's friend Carrington accompanied him to the station. Bertie seemed nervous, and Carrington stood on the platform and watched as the prince consort kissed his son, and they drove off in a coach to Mattingly. It was a wet and stormy day, but Albert insisted on going for a private walk with Bertie. But Bertie got lost, and by the time they returned, Albert was soaked to the skin with racking pains in his back and legs. He had been tormented by sleeplessness and rheumatism for the past fortnight, but he stayed up talking to his son until 1 a.m. Prince Albert returned to Windsor Castle a sick man. I never saw him so low, said Queen Victoria. She blamed Albert's depression and sleeplessness on Bertie's fall, which broke him quite down. Albert himself confided in Vicky that his shattered state was due to worry, about which I beg you not to ask questions. Watching the Eton volunteers 2 days later, Prince Albert shuddered inside his fur-lined coat. Not until the 7th of December, after he had been ill for more than 2 weeks, did the doctors make a diagnosis of fever, meaning typhoid. Prince Albert wandered restlessly day and night, pacing Windsor's state bedrooms in his quilted dressing gown. What was keeping the prince so awake? Back in Cambridge, Bertie spent his time larking with Natty Rothschild and his hounds. It is perhaps better to say as little as possible about the festivities here. A conscience-stricken Natty later wrote, after realizing that his playtime with the prince while the prince consort was dying was incredibly bad optics. When Prince Albert was diagnosed with typhoid, Bertie was warned he must not return to Windsor for fear the fever was epidemic. But he received little detailed news about his father's illness and did not care to write, so busy was he with Natty Rothschild. Queen Victoria, for her part, wrote no letters to him. We further find that Bertie's household at the time of his marriage consisted largely of men who had served him before 1863, and so it seems Bertie took his father's advice to heart at least for a few years. General Knollys headed the household as comptroller and treasurer. One of Bertie's equerries, Major Teasdale, had been picked by Prince Albert himself to attend him at White Lodge in 1858. Another, Captain Charles Grey, accompanied him to Italy. Bertie's old tutor at Oxford, Herbert Fisher, became his private secretary. Bertie set about changing this household as soon as he was settled in Marlborough House. By 1867, General Knollys was in a panic at his inability to control his royal master. The Queen implored Bertie to gather round him really good people, as Prince Albert had done, but Bertie surrounded himself with cronies who would say yes to whatever he asked. His friend Arthur Ellis, whom he made equerry in 1867, belonged to the Ellis-Harding dynasty of courtiers, and Victoria raised no objection to that appointment. But she complained about the appointment at equerry of Captain Oliver Montague, a younger son of the Earl of Sandwich, and a rollicking officer in the Blues, whom Bertie called a wicked boy. So who was behind Bertie's decision to shake up his household so extremely? Several Rothschilds were among the original Marlborough Club members. They received the seal of royal approval in 1868, when Bertie went stag hunting at Mentmore. He traveled down on the train with Natty Rothschild, smoking all the way. At Mentmore he devoured a breakfast so enormous it seemed he did not mean to go out, and then rode very well all day. Natty noted admiringly that the prince was marvelously strong, in spite of the fact that for the past week he had been sitting up night after night smoking, and has never more than 4 hours of sleep. Natty was a Cambridge friend of Bertie, but the immensely successful Jewish Rothschilds had to struggle to gain admission to the top set. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert simply would not allow it. When Bertie was invited to a Rothschild ball in 1865, Lord Spencer, who was groom of the stole to the Prince of Wales, strongly advised him to refuse. The Rothschilds, he said, are very worthy people, but they essentially hold their position from wealth and perhaps the accidental beauty of the first daughter they brought out into the world. Spencer failed to see the Rothschilds were valuable to Bertie precisely because of their wealth. Bertie invited a number of Jews to join his inner circle and recognized their cosmopolitan networks abroad were indispensable when he traveled, especially to France, where he entertained many ladies of the night as the Baron of Renfrew incognito. Lacking the prejudices of many Victorian Englishmen, Bertie was more than happy to trade social recognition for Rothschild cash and company, but this would place him in hot water on more than one occasion. Natty worked as a partner in the London branch of the family bank, N.M. Rothschild and Sons, and he became head of the bank after his father's death in 1879. During his tenure, he also maintained its preeminent position in private venture finance and in issuing loans to the governments of the U.S., Russia, and Austria. Following the Rothschilds' funding of the Suez Canal, a close relationship was maintained with Benjamin Disraeli, and affairs in Egypt, which can be traced to today's Greater Israel Project. Disraeli founded the Zionist arm of the British Conservative Party, which remains intact to this day. Disraeli converted to Anglicanism when he was 12 years old, but always maintained his Jewish culture, and with financiers like Rothschild, Disraeli created a financial political establishment as Britain knows it today. Back in 1847, MP Lionel de Rothschild returned for the City of London. As a practicing Jew, he could not take the oath of allegiance in the prescribed Christian form and therefore could not take his seat, putting the Conservative victory that year in danger. Lord John Russell, the Whig leader who succeeded Peel as Prime Minister, proposed in the Commons that the oath should be amended for the first time to permit Jews to enter Parliament. Disraeli spoke strongly in favor of this measure, arguing Christianity was completed Judaism, and asking the House of Commons, "Where is your Christianity if you do not believe in their Judaism?" Disraeli's support for Lionel Rothschild extended to his son, Natty. Disraeli supported every single war he came across that Brits could die in, from the Crimean War to the American Civil War. The Rothschilds in turn bankrolled various parties from the United States to Russia. They were especially intent on ruining Russia, which occurred in 1917 with the collapse of the Tsarist government, which you can learn about in the Romanov playlists on this channel. Rothschild also funded Cecil Rhodes in the development of the British South Africa Company and the De Beers diamond conglomerate. Diamonds remain one of Israel's largest exports, despite that occupying force having no natural diamond mines to speak of. Natty's friendship to Bertie was very helpful due to Bertie's gambling debts. Natty could forward funds to Bertie outside his royal stipend, which constantly had to be increased. Republicanism surged during the Victorian and Edwardian eras, with Queen Victoria hiding from the public in mourning for years after her husband's death in 1861, and Prince Bertie spending wildly and engaging in extramarital affairs so flagrant he was nicknamed King Key. Bertie's gambling tied him to scandal in 1891 with the Tranbury Croft affair, where the prince took the stand to testify against a cheat at cards, Sir William Gordon Cumming. This gambling night took place in September 1890 at the home of York shipbuilder Arthur Wilson. Wilson was the director of the Northeastern Railway at the time. The Northeastern Railway catered extensively to the Rothschilds, naming their St. Frusquin A3 locomotive after one of the Rothschilds' award-winning horses. So it's very possible the gambling night that landed the Prince of Wales in so much hot water was a Rothschild stunt from the start. Natty later administered Cecil Rhodes' estate after Rhodes' death in 1902 and helped set up the Rhodes Scholarship Scheme at the University of Oxford. The Rhodes Scholarship has, from its beginning, been critical of England. Its first scholar in 1903, William Macmillan, publicly denounced England's role in Africa. The Rhodes Scholarship has also been critical in nominating individuals who would pervert the course of justice. For example, recipient the Honorable Albert van der St. of South Africa, who became a Supreme Court justice like many Rhodes Scholars, paved the way for white genocide in South Africa by enabling voter reform among blacks in the 1950s. Natty was a prominent member of the Round Table movement created in 1909, which pushed globalism. In 1910, a public meeting was convened at the Ritz Hotel for the establishment of the London Mosque Fund, for a mosque in London worthy of the tradition of Islam and worthy of the capital of the British Empire. In November 1910, the Right Honourable Sayyid Amir Ali, an Indian judge and member of the Inner Temple, one of the British Four Inns of Court, arranged a meeting at the Ritz Hotel under the chairmanship of His Highness Sir Sultan Muhammad Sag Aga Khan III of Pakistan. The Aga Khan and the Khan family are some of the founding members of Pakistan. The 1910 meeting resolved to establish a fund for the purpose of building a mosque and Islamic cultural center in London, mainly for Pakistanis and Indians. Prominent British educator and writer Sir Theodore Morrison, the British educator of Indian princes, chaired the first official meeting of the London Mosque Fund. Morrison started an employment bureau to help Indian students get a job over British students. He used to keep student records with his personal remarks, so that upon the request of the government, he would furnish the record to help the students. So the movement subverted British workers from the beginning. Natty became a trustee of this London Mosque Fund. Shah Jahan Begum of Bhopal, India, offered the London Mosque Fund a donation of £1,000 on the condition a student hostel would be annexed to the mosque and halal dietary provisions would be catered for. This subversion of native British culture, which does not practice halal, helped lead to the rise of Sadiq Khan, the London mayor who was sworn in 2016. 2016 marks the start year where London became the rape capital of Europe, with a rape rate of 1 per hour, which outstrips that of the rape of Nanking. Back in 1847, Natty's uncle, Anthony de Rothschild, was made a baronet in the baronetage of the United Kingdom. Since Sir Anthony had no male heirs, upon his death the baronetcy passed by special remainder to his nephew Natty. In 1885, at the age of 45, Natty became a member of the House of Lords when he was created Baron Rothschild of Tring in the county of Hertford in the peerage of the United Kingdom. He was also a hereditary baron of the Austrian Empire, a noble title that he inherited via his father. In 1838, Queen Victoria had authorized the use of his Austrian title in the United Kingdom 2 years prior to his birth, due to lobbying and donations to the crown by his father, Lionel, who was also an MP. When Natty was raised to the peerage by Prime Minister Gladstone, Rothschild was the first Jewish member of the House of Lords not to have been previously converted to Christianity. In common with the rest of his family, Natty joined the breakaway Liberal Unionist Party formed in 1886 by Joseph Chamberlain, but this party ultimately merged into the Conservative Party and formed a strong arm of Zionists. Blackmail from these individuals was a real and constant struggle. In 1909, Rothschild was famously derided by David Lloyd George, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, over his opposition to the people's budget, when the latter said at a meeting at the Holborn restaurant, "I really think we are having too much Lord Rothschild. Are we to have all ways of reform, financial and social, blocked simple by a notice board, no thoroughfare by order of Nathaniel Rothschild?" Rothschild recommended the Lords reject the Parliament bill, which was, however, passed. But the Rothschild Disraeli arm remained strong, especially when Disraeli refused to help British farmers with tariffs under the Corn Laws, breaking a decades-long economic practice that helped British farms. In 1914, after the outbreak of World War I, Rothschild was consulted for economic advice by Lloyd George. At his first invitation to confer at the British Treasury, when asked what could be done to raise more money for the war effort, Rothschild reportedly answered, "Tax the rich and tax them heavily." This "tax the rich" motto turned into the estate grabs of the post-World War I era. We'll turn again to Jane Ridley in her research on this topic in the book Bertie. By the end of 1880s, Bertie's finances reached a crisis point. He was pestered by moneylenders, and in Paris, the ubiquitous French police reported the hotels where he stayed were ringed by debt collectors. The Prince of Wales' annuity from Parliament was fixed at £39,000. The income from the Duchy of Cornwall grew from £59,000 in 1881 to over £64,000 in 1890, in spite of an agricultural depression. But the prince's gross income dropped from £122,000 in 1881 to £107,600 in 1890. Gladstone's secretary, Edward Hamilton, urged his master to reform the prince's finances in 1884. He considered Prime Minister Gladstone was the only person who could do it. A Tory administration would have the greatest possible difficulty about bringing the matter forward. Gladstone, by contrast, would be bound to be supported by the opposition, would carry most of his own side with him, and would be able to stave off hostility from all but the very extremes. Gladstone disagreed. Parliament, he warned, would be certain to insist on a commission of inquiry, and would probably find a total absence of economic management from the prince. Bertie took the hint. He never asked for an increase in his allowance as Prince of Wales, and he had no intention of inviting scrutiny of his affairs by Parliament. In 1889, the Queen appealed to Parliament for royal grants for the children of the Prince of Wales in light of the impending marriage of his eldest daughter and the coming of age of his sons. Parliament grudgingly voted the prince £36,000 per annum in trust for his children, as well as a capital sum of £60,000. What exactly did the prince's work consist of? Asked Mr. Abraham, the radical MP for Glamorgan. On a typical day that His Royal Highness held a levee, he unveiled a statue, he dined at the Mansion House, and he witnessed part of Figaro at Covent Garden, and that was supposed to be a hard day's work. Rather than risk more parliamentary criticism, Bertie's solution was to borrow from financiers. "My dear Natty," he wrote to Natty in 1883, "I cannot find words too extreme in gratitude for your great kindness and liberality, which you may be convinced will never be forgotten by me. Documents in the Rothschilds' archive evidence a private advance of £100,000 made to Bertie in 1889, paid in cash and secured against title deeds owned by the Crown. A further loan of £60,000 advanced on the Sandringham estates was made in 1893. Whether this money was ever repaid is not clear." "We resented the introduction of Jews into the social set of the Prince of Wales," wrote Daisy Brooke, "not because we disliked them, but because they had brains and understood finance. As a class, we did not like brains. As for money, our only understanding of it lay in the spending, not the making of it." Reactionaries sneered at Bertie's Jewish court, while Bertie's defenders praised his diversity. But for Bertie, the munificence of men such as Rothschild and Hirsch was as much a matter of financial survival as social inclusiveness. He was frankly just spending way too much. Rewarding them with recognition was the very least he could do. These men saved Marlborough House from disaster. Bertie's admission of Jewish plutocrats to court was unique. In no other Western country were Jews accepted as leaders of society at the time. There were also charity events that the Rothschilds pushed upon the Prince of Wales. One was the Wales Hospital Fund. Bertie's committee, which met at Marlborough House, included the head of Anglo Jewry, Lord Rothschild, the chief rabbi, the Bishop of London, and millionaires such as Julius Verner and Ernest Cassel. Many of these Jewish financiers created the King Edward's Hospital Fund, as it became, and it was at that time the most ambitious hospital fund ever conceived. It survives today as the King's Fund. One aspect of the Rothschild-Bertie friendship was the incredible correspondence that opened the prince up to blackmail. Queen Victoria had written numerous frank letters to Disraeli. The copyright in these was, of course, the sovereign's, but the physical letters were in the possession of Disraeli. This worried Bertie dreadfully. When Monty Corey, Disraeli's executor, died in 1903, Disraeli's papers passed to Natty Rothschild, but Queen Victoria's letters were referred to the King, King Edward VII, to vet. Queen Victoria had written to Disraeli at length and on every conceivable subject, both personal and political. When the journalist William Moneypenny was appointed as Disraeli's biographer in 1904, Bertie asked Rothschild to allow Escher and Knollys free access to his mother's letters at Rothschild Bank, where they were held, and they could then tell me if they consider there are any I should object to being published. 3 years later, Knollys formally requested Rothschild to send all Queen Victoria's letters to Windsor for the king to look over, as he had ignored the request. Rothschild explained he couldn't because the archive was in a horrible state of confusion, but Queen Victoria's letters had been transferred to Mr. Scones, who was the head clerk of Disraeli's solicitor, Sir Philip Rose. Mr. Scones' brother had been frequently employed at Windsor Castle, by Her Majesty's permission, making copies of these letters. When Escher heard this story, he could scarcely contain himself. That the most confidential documents which can be imagined should have been read by a lawyer's clerk was an outrage. I don't think any right or reasonable claim can be put forward by these trustees to retain the sovereign's letters. The affair seemed to him to show the necessity for an act of Parliament, giving the Crown power to recall their own documents. I am having a short bill drafted, he said. Escher's bill never made it, but he had a convention on his side. Queen Victoria had laid it down that letters written by the sovereign, any sovereign, should be returned to the sovereign after the recipient's death. This had been done during her reign, but Rothschild ignored it. Escher felt justified in extracting from the Rothschild archive 4 packets of confidential Disraeli letters, including one packet which contained almost all of Bertie's letters to Disraeli. He showed them to Bertie, who ordered them to be destroyed. The same happened when George Profit, the son of Queen Victoria's agent at Balmoral, Dr. Profit, attempted to blackmail Bertie over letters about John Brown, Queen Victoria's rumored Scottish lover. Bertie entrusted Sir James Reed with the job of retrieving the letters. Reed eventually succeeded in persuading Profit to surrender a tin box containing more than 300 letters from Queen Victoria concerning John Brown, many of which were termed most compromising. These were presumably destroyed. Bertie worried about Victoria's letters up until his death. He wrote to the Viceroy of India, "I am not satisfied in my mind that there may not be still letters in Queen Victoria's handwriting in their possession, and I should be glad if further discreet investigations could be made. They must at once return these letters, or they will be the sufferers thereby." Natty's tax the rich motto turned into the estate grabs of the post-World War I era, which saw the British nobility, which had lost 17% of their heirs in World War I, also sell their ancestral homes to pay new death and estate taxes, also resulting in a 17% loss of all British country homes. Since 1900, 1,200 country houses have been demolished in England. In Scotland, the figure is much higher. While Rothschild had little concern for the ancestral homes of Britain, he offered a stock prospectus to raise money for homes for Jews in East London, focusing on the Jewish communities of Spitalfields and Whitechapel. The Jewish dwellings there had recently attracted ire for their filth, and Natty was eager to correct this. Here is the text of that prospectus, which is a precursor to hedge funds purchasing single-family homes in the United States today. Jews are townspeople, not farmers, and rarely lived in the countryside. In whichever towns they settled, they clustered together for self-protection, for reasons of language and culture, and to be within walking distance of a synagogue. In the late 19th century and first half of the 20th century, London's main Jewish quarter was in the Whitechapel, Spitalfields, and Mile End Old Town districts, and the parish of St. George in the east. These were areas that had previously been settled by earlier Huguenot and German immigrants. The former people largely assimilated or moved elsewhere, but the less affluent German community remained in Whitechapel and St. George's until the First World War. Towards the end of the 19th century, 90% of the capital's Jews lived in East London, and 40% of the populations of the borough of Stepney were Jewish. The East End took on an exotic character, streets filled with people speaking Yiddish, Lettish from Latvia, or German, men dressed in black jupises and with side curls, Germanic names, and Hebrew lettering over the shop fronts, kosher butchers, Jewish booksellers, and Jewish music halls. The East End area of 2 square miles was one of the most densely populated in the whole of England. Throughout the second half of the 19th century, railway companies ran lines through East London, raising many homes along the way. Residents simply moved a few streets away, creating increased overcrowding as the number of houses decreased and the population grew, with new arrivals. There were some streets of fine houses, albeit run down, as well as mean slums, small stinking alleyways, and narrow courtyards. As with London's other rookeries, water supply and sanitary conditions were often poor, which only began to improve when a new water authority was created after 1903. Refuse was often left to rot. Conditions inside many homes were bad, with leaking ceilings, damp walls, and foul water closets. In 1884, The Lancet published a report that galvanized the Jewish Board of Guardians into appointing an inspector of housings. Of these properties initially checked, 93% were found to not have a flushing toilet. Jews tended to crowd more people into each dwelling, encouraging landlords, often themselves Jews, to charge higher rents than to Gentiles. The latter were then forced out of properties, and whole streets became part of the Jewish ghetto. Many Jewish families took in lodgers, perhaps someone newly arrived. Overcrowded homes were the norm, often with 8 or 9 people sharing 2 small rooms, and many doubled up as workshops. Hence, much of home life was spent outside on the doorstep or in the street. From the 1870s, London slums were gradually cleared to make way for social housing. In 1884, the United Synagogue reported on the state of East End housing. This resulted in two private social housing companies. The 4% Industrial Dwellings Company provided a 4% return to investors and was founded and chaired by Natty Rothschild. It still exists as the Industrial Dwelling Society. Samuel Barnett of the St. Jude's Church at Whitechapel was the primary instigator of the East End Dwellings Company. While Natty encouraged the Prince of Wales to engage in dubious sexual alliances with actresses and French dancers, Natty himself kept it all in the family, literally. In April 1867, at the age of 27, he married Emma Louise von Rothschild, a double first cousin, because they shared both sets of grandparents, from the Rothschild banking family of Germany and Frankfurt. They had 3 children. From 1889 until his death, Natty was Lord Lieutenant of Buckinghamshire and was known as an agriculture fan. In the 1902 Coronation Honours List, he was appointed a Privy Councillor and was sworn a member of the Council at Buckingham Palace in August 1902. That year, he was appointed to the Royal Victorian Order as a Knight Grand Cross. He outlived the Prince of Wales by 5 years and was able to see the first of the disastrous bloody war of brother against brother in World War I.